an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Season 4, Episode 5. I'm so happy for you. In this episode, Rebecca's friends are going to be taking some new steps in their lives, which involves moving away. And I understand her feeling of panic here. And it's nice that the show is coping with change. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Collette for commissioning this episode. How are you doing, Collette, if you're out there, if you're listening? Megan says there's a bonus song they didn't include in this episode that gets it stuck in my head. Ooh, I want to hear about that bonus song. Tell me later. So this is something that's sort of like been vaguely brought up and on my mind while watching this show is the idea of getting some sort of like stability with your mental health and feeling pretty good. And that being the moment in your life when things just sort of fly apart or go up in the air, not necessarily in an inherently bad way, but it will be like you suddenly get hit with a major change. And this is a really great way to do that, to have it not only be one person, but two. Because when you are at the age that these ladies are all meant to be at, which is like, you know, right around 30, a little bit before, the people are like starting to set down roots a little bit more permanently than they had been before. And oftentimes that involves changing where they live, moving to another city, state, or just moving out of the house with you and to some place that's like their own. And I personally haven't really experienced this in the way that it's depicted in the show, because I was often the person like leaving and changing things. I never stayed in one place enough to feel like all my friends are leaving me behind. It didn't really happen that way. And also, I wasn't close enough to people earlier in my life that I had any sort of like major reaction to losing people. It always felt like, well, they'll be there. I'll see them. It'll be fine, you know? And at the point I'm at in my life now, I don't have anybody who lives near me that I'm friends with other than Sydney, who's going to be my maid of honor. And other than that, it's just her. So I was sort of, while watching this, putting myself into the shoes of like, what if Sydney left? And her being like the one person that I really hang out with would be particularly hard. At least Rebecca has Paula and the potential to make other friends. But obviously she goes about that in the wrong way this episode. But I do really like that this is brought up in the script. You know, the fact that part of working with mental health and figuring things out for yourself and learning how to manage the patterns that you have and your reactions to things involves figuring out exactly how to be okay with major upheavals in your life. And that can be really, really hard. I know for myself, major change is usually accompanied by a complete abandonment at any sort of genuine self-care. I will have had a really good, like, you know, I'm eating better and I'm making an effort to exercise. And then a major shift happens and all of a sudden that's the first thing that gets thrown out the window. I'll keep working. I'll keep cleaning the house. But anything that's like I wanted to go to the gym. I wanted to make a nice dinner. I wanted to take a bath. I wanted to get a manicure and a pedicure. That stuff is the first thing that I'm just like, I don't have time for that. My brain is too fucked up. And it's also, that reaction is part of why I do so badly with change. Because those are the times where you really need to take the most care of yourself and pay the most attention. But my instinct is to bury myself in work so that I don't have the free time to think about all the changes and get upset, you know? And it was really interesting this episode to see the way that Rebecca copes with it, because her instinct, which is to find other friends, makes sense. But her obsession over their youth it's not just the fact that she wants to be younger and is like panicking over being at her age and not having progressed as far as she thinks she should have, but also the fact that if you are friends with exclusively younger people and you are progressing at an even pace in your life and they are several years behind you in most of those milestones, you're always going to feel like you're doing better, you know, like you have the advantage. And Rebecca makes a major confession to Dr. Akopi in this episode and admits that she sees life as a competition, and when her friends get successful, she feels like she's losing. I think a lot of us can relate to this sort of thing, right? I mean, there's even an episode of Sex and the City that starts off with the line, let's face it, sometimes there is nothing harder in life than being happy for somebody else. We all have this to a degree. You can still genuinely want what's best for your friends. You can still like be cheering them on and excited for them and feel like this is somehow a reflection of your own failure or your own lack of motivation or what, you know, and that can stem from so many things. Personally, I've already talked about how when I was younger, I didn't feel like I had a lot of close friends. And so I experienced this a lot more when I was much younger because I was more insecure in general. And I wasn't as close to people who were like making moves and getting successful. So I resented it more because I wasn't invested in their well-being the way that I am with friends now. You know, it's now I'm just like 100% behind the success of my friends. And it's very much like if one of us succeeds, then we're all succeeding kind of feeling like we're in this together. But this mindset of a competitive streak really hit home for me because I remember feeling this way. And it's interesting how differently we each define being successful, because Rebecca's hang-up is the fact that both Valencia and Heather are in committed relationships. Heather's friggin' married. They both have careers that are really beginning to take off. And they're making major moves in order to facilitate those careers and to deepen their relationships and, you know, making more of a commitment in a way, because when you agree to like leave a city and move with somebody, you are moving to a strange place where you don't necessarily know many people and your partner is going to be your main support. And that's a big, that's a big deal. It's a lot of trust you're putting in a person. So I understand Rebecca's feelings on this. At the same time, I wish that she heard Dr. Akopian more, and I feel like she eventually gets there. But the end of the episode, like when she's talking to Dr. Akopian and confessing this feeling of being behind, Dr. Akopian is basically like, well, you are a little behind, and you had a challenge that they didn't have. And so it's taken some extra time for you. And she has a very negative reaction because she expected Dr. Akopian to comfort her and tell her that she isn't behind at all. Don't be silly. And instead, Dr. Akopian's like, well, no, you are behind. And I say this with the full awareness that I am not good at this myself. So don't come at me. But I wish that those of us who struggle with mental illness could give ourselves the grace of realizing everything we do has an extra hurdle or two in front of it. And those who are neurotypical aren't going to like face those hurdles. And so while it may feel on paper like we are behind, if we were actually keeping track of the number of things we're dealing with, our list might be longer and more intense than theirs. And so it looks like we're behind as far as milestones, but the actual like daily tasks of living, we are ahead because we are dealing with this whole other aspect of ourselves that I think even neurotypical people are eventually going to have to deal with also. It's not forced on them the way that it is when you have a mental illness. So in a way, you're doing all of this self-reflection, and it's work that's extremely valuable beyond just dealing with mental health, but also growing as a person. And I think that neurotypical people will face that exact same sort of necessity eventually, and they'll be behind you at that point. We just love to have such a distinct idea of progress, forward progress, you know, and it's not fair to judge everybody by the same metric and standard. And yet we all tend to do it. It's just an instinct because we really like rules. I think human beings in general love having like guidelines, and it comforts us to feel like, okay, I'm on track. That means my life is good, like TM, you know, like it's approved by whomever. I really think Rebecca isn't thinking about what amazing progress it is for her to have set aside being a lawyer. I understand that her pretzel stand isn't as profitable as she would like, she mentions here. And so in her eyes, there's a feeling of like not being successful because she's not making a lot of money. But the fact that she has done this at all and recognized that being a lawyer isn't what she wants and walked away from a career that offered a lot of security, it's really impressive that she made that big a step. That's extremely brave. She's taking a huge risk, and it's a risk that's very different than the risk her friends are taking. You know, it involves a little bit more faith because she's doing something that she truly doesn't have any experience in. And she's breaking from a pattern of like wanting to please her mother, as well as a pattern that was like her own metric for being successful, making partner and all this stuff that she had sort of believed would bring her happiness. So I think that she's doing amazing, you know, like she's just really kind of killing it. But because she's not in a successful relationship and she's not absolutely raking it in with this new business, she feels like she's missing out on something. Meanwhile, I'm watching the show thinking, the fact that she told Nathaniel they were bad for each other and things were over between them is enormous growth. I was so excited to see that moment where she draws a clear boundary and is just like, no, we're bad for each other and I don't want to see you anymore. And it's just that, for me, is a real mark of growth more than a successful relationship. Like, relationships are undeniably really fun and very worthwhile, have a ton of value. Don't get me wrong. But for somebody like Rebecca, they can be easily used as a crutch and be kind of dangerous. And she's realized that. And that's when something brings you inherent comfort and you have to reject it, that's like a difficult place to be anytime. And I love that Nathaniel's standing in front of her telling her that he loves her, which is what she has always thought that she wanted from someone. He's giving her what season 1 Rebecca would have she would have eaten this up. Choosing to say no to this is just as important as saying yes to another relationship. I mean, we haven't really seen Heather and Valencia make the same choice in this way, like rejecting something that wasn't good for them, until Valencia has the pee party, peeing on Josh's equipment with Rebecca, which is pretty good. But initially, you know, they like, she breaks up with Josh, but they're in the immediate aftermath. There isn't like a sense of her feeling like really good about it. She's just so depressed. And I really liked that we watch her like come around. So that, you know, she decided that she was going to draw a boundary. So like, you know, I said that we didn't really see that with her, but we did. So I'm lying. Heather is an interesting one because she was like with Greg and he wound up sort of bailing, and then she dumped him because he was being the way that he was. And in between, there wasn't a lot of like, did she date anybody in the meantime? I know there was something, right? So, but Heather is so already in control of her boundaries that I don't really feel like we needed to see that from her, because we know she has no problem with drawing a line in the sand and being like, here's what's okay and here's what's not. So that, you know, I was going down this road with the intention of being like, Rebecca has gotten some growth that maybe the two of them haven't, but I think I'm talking out of my ass there, because Valencia has kind of made that transition, and Heather, that's never been an issue for her in the first place. But you know, it's obviously a challenge for Rebecca. They don't have that challenge, and here she is, really like finally doing it and pushing away something that she would have once thought was the answer, and that's huge. And I know a lot of people who, as we get older, we look back at the things that we tolerated in relationships, and we are blown away that, first of all, we put up with that shit. And second of all, that we didn't think better was out there because we were so used to being treated badly, or so used to like taking people back who had been bad for us, acting as if they were the only option in the world, that we truly didn't believe better existed, or that if we drew our boundaries that they would be respected. And that's part of the joy of getting older, is you just stop giving a shit about putting somebody else's comfort and happiness before yourself, especially women. We are so trained to hang all of our worth as women on how attractive men find us. And of course, I'm talking about this in a very like hetero-cis point of view. Forgive me, but that's my point of view. But even people who are not straight, even women who aren't straight, they are still told that that is how they should like measure their worth, is by how attractive men find them. Whether those women find the men attractive is irrelevant. It's just always been about the men. And I think a lot of us went through a stage in our lives where we were doing a lot of things in order to attract men without really considering whether these men were worth attracting, or what attracting them said about the energy we were putting out there and what kind of self-worth we were displaying to the world. I know for me, I would just pretend to be like a whole other person with different guys. It was like I was trying on personalities sometimes. And part of that is just not really knowing who you are when you're really young. But part of it was almost like playing a game to see, can I get this guy to like be really into me? Let me see what kind of person he's into and what works. And thinking that if I figured out what worked, that could be something that I just incorporated into who I am. Rather than the very superior method of being who I am. And then if somebody has a problem with that, well, they're not for me. That's like such a clearer way of distinguishing between who's a good partner for you and not. But when you don't have a great grip on who you are, and you feel like the more men I attract, the more valuable I am, it's really difficult to draw boundaries and feel like you are still worthy if there's only one person who seems to be interested. It was like a numbers game for me, you know, rather than actually looking for a partner that made sense for me as a person. And now it's just so beautiful because I have shed so much, and I'm sure there's more to go. I'm sure as I get older, I'll shed even more, but I have shed so much of my concern over what men think, what other people think. It's not gone entirely, but it's so significantly dropped that it really has made a difference in my life. And that begins to be where you are to prove that you're like maturing, is that you stop measuring yourself by outside scales and milestones that you didn't agree to or don't mean the same things to you that they meant to whoever established them in the first place. And we see that by the end of this episode. She has been putting on this whole show trying to pretend that she's like younger and hipper and more with it than she is, and gradually just realizes like, oh my God, that was so much effort and their priorities are totally different, and that's just not me anymore, and that's okay. I used to look at people who were older than me and who would talk about how, oh, I used to go out and party and I just can't be bothered anymore. And at the time when I was younger and still going out to party and enjoying clubbing and all that, I heard them say that, and I sort of interpreted it as them grieving, like, I wish that I still did that stuff. And now I know better that while there is a part of you that's grieving a point in your life that's gone, it's much more when you say things like that, you're remembering how different a person you were. It's not even necessarily you wanting to get that back. It's more like the sudden realization that what had seemed like a good time to you 10 years ago is so the opposite of what looks like a good time to you now. And you have to simultaneously recognize and absorb that this means you're aging. And that's like, you are echoing the sentiments of people who you thought were sort of lame when you were younger. But then once you get past that, you're just like, yeah, but I'm happy. This is what I want. I used to love spending an hour and a half on my makeup and another hour straightening my hair. I used to love, like, you know, going and dancing on a box and having dudes be super into me. And now that just sounds really tiring and shallow and not really worth anything. And while I still want to do that kind of thing occasionally, it's not like my life's blood the way it was. And good, because that's not really a way to live. You go through that and you experience things, and that's a time in your life that you can look back on with fondness. And it's meaningful to you because you realize looking back how much you learned in that period and all of the things that you got to do and see while you had unlimited energy. But now that's over. The door's closing on that, and that's okay. And Rebecca finally gets to a point by the end of this that she's like, okay, that's okay. So I've talked for 20 minutes now and not actually discussed the episode from beginning to end. So I'm going to just start off. I really like how this show does the whole like recap thing and does it in a way that's sort of inherently funny. Like the last episode, there were in the recaps all these mentions of Tucker to point out to us that he has indeed been mentioned a few times. And then we have the flashbacks to like the girl gang and how much they have all been there for each other, and there's friendships like growing and evolving. So I just really, I love these, like, they give you a hint as to what's coming in a way, and also remind you that of things that when you see them in a montage, you're like, oh wow, a lot has really changed, you know? So this episode starts off with a girl gang get together where Rebecca has made a bunch of pretzels and wine pairings, and she's talking about how happy she is. I really love this job. Dr. Akopian says I'm doing well. Volunteering at the jail is going great. I just feel really grounded and centered. And Heather and Valencia give each other this look. And they are kind of chugging their wine. And all of a sudden, Rebecca realizes that there's something going on. And she thinks, Heather, are you getting divorced? Oof, I'm sorry. We all saw it coming. What? No. You did? No. Listen, guys. I know that this is like the kind of thing that we all know in theory, but I have to say it. When somebody's going through a breakup, and Rebecca doesn't even know if that's happening here, so it's bad. But when somebody's going through a breakup, especially if it's a first breakup with that person, and by that I mean the first time they're breaking up with that partner, don't say how much you hated their partner or how much you think you like knew that it wasn't going to just don't, because you do not know what's coming around the corner. And if they get back together, you're going to be the person that they know hates their partner or doesn't think that this is a good match. And that adds this like weird layer of tension that sometimes can make it so that you lose the friendship because they start to not want to be around you as often because they feel like you're judging them. I know how tempting it can be, especially when somebody is genuinely bad for a person. Now, if you've already been telling them that somebody's bad, and it's that because they're abusive, carry on. I think that's different. But when it's just somebody that you don't like, for whatever reason, it's just often not worth it. I had a whole thing recently with somebody telling me that they broke up with somebody, and I didn't respond because I was concerned about this exact thing. And indeed, they are back together with that person now. And I'm kind of glad that I just said nothing because I knew that there was a chance. And indeed, that was how it went. So I just had to take an aside to mention that. So Heather at this point tells Rebecca that she's moving with Hector to a condo in El Segundo. And I don't know exactly how far that is from West Covina. I feel like she talks about it, and I have forgotten exactly the distance that this is. But it's obviously going to be a somewhat big change because, I mean, not just moving out of West Covina, but also she's moving out of the apartment that she has shared with Rebecca this entire time. And then Valencia, because like this obviously throws Rebecca for a loop in the first place. But then Valencia drops her news. Beth and I got an offer to work at a huge party planning company. We rented a tiny apartment the size of my current closet, but it's the Big Apple. I'm moving to New York. And this really is sort of a trigger moment for Rebecca where it's a combination of feeling like she doesn't have her shit figured out and just major changes and a support system that she's grown dependent on. And I don't say dependent on with a negative. It sounds negative when you say it like that she has grown to depend on in a way. It's shifting and moving. It's still there, but it's just different when people aren't there in person, you know? And I understand the reaction that she's having. I really do. And I know this is something that Owen has gone through because he's, we're still living in the place that he went to high school. This is a town that holds a lot of his friends from the past decade and a half. And people have moved away. It's been difficult for him to like see folks that are either moving out of state. He had one friend who like moved to Kansas and other friends who moved like just over state lines. So they're not easy to go and see. It's like a 45-minute drive. It's distant enough when somebody used to be right around the corner that it changes things. Megan says, it looks like it's a 45-minute drive from West Covina to El Segundo, about 35 miles. Okay, so it's not as far away as Valencia, but it's enough that it's like a bit of a project to get to see each other. And she shared an actual house with Heather versus Valencia. So she was used to Heather being around literally all the time. And now it's not only will Heather not be in the house with her, but she won't be able to just like go down to the bar and see her anytime. So yeah, that's a big change. And also, I think that as a viewer, my concern is Heather's been like the sole voice of reason a few times when Rebecca has been doing bonkers shit. So for her to not be there speaking into her ear and telling her, hey, that's a bad idea, don't do that. I'm like, well, I really hope that like Rebecca has a bit of that voice in her head for herself by now, because I don't entirely trust her judgment quite yet on some things. And it's really hard, the two of them sort of they're telling her this news with the full awareness that this is going to be really hard for her. And this isn't exactly dealt with in the episode, and it's fine that it's not. It's not a criticism, but I don't know if you guys have experience with being the delicate friend. I haven't, but I've felt like I was, and I've seen it from the outside, where it feels like people are kind of like more worried about you and how you're doing than any of your other friends. And it makes you feel like you're either a project or that you are just like a more of a child, more of a chore in some ways, you know? And if I were Rebecca in this instance, watching this whole thing, I would feel a little bit like anxious just because of the fact that the two of them were so concerned about my reaction, telling me was going to be really hard. And I understand that that's like, they are taking her feelings into consideration, and that's a good friendship. But also, it's not like, you know, they're trying to be careful about it. They're ripping the Band-Aid off because they're realizing that this is going to be maybe enough of a shock that it rocks her a bit. And that's a weird place to be, to sort of know that. I very much appreciate that there's nothing in this episode where either of them is wrestling with whether or not to go, because I've seen that sort of thing before where a person's like, so-and-so really needs me right now and I shouldn't leave. And it's such a shame whenever that happens, because it always feels like it's making another person sort of the bad guy for keeping them there and keeping them from their dreams, when really that person's still making their own decision. You know, the other party that they are so concerned about isn't even aware they're wrestling with whether to do this because of them or not. And so it puts the responsibility on a party that's not necessarily even like part of this. And I like that both Heather and Valencia have already come to the conclusion, we're leaving. And that's a done deal by the time they start talking to Rebecca, like they've got it all planned out exactly what they're doing. So yeah, I don't know. I felt bad. Like, you know, it's sort of the kind of, there have been some things lately that I've been reading. There was a Reddit, Am I the Asshole, a while back. Or not even a while back. It was actually only like a week. What is time? And, somebody was taking responsibility for their like brother's mental health and saying like the fact that I moved away and wasn't in his life led to him having sort of like an episode, and everybody in the comments having to be like, no, that is not your responsibility. But it's hard to not feel that way sometimes when somebody means a lot to you and you know they're going to have a certain reaction. It's difficult to not feel like you're responsible for that reaction, and you're not. They have the tools. Rebecca has a therapist that she can go to with this. And I really appreciate that this season, every time she's faced with something major like this, we see her almost immediately with Dr. Akopian. It's clear that she is handling things as best she can with the tools that she's got and not just trying to muddle through, you know. And she eventually like talks to Paula about how she needs to start going back to group again, or actually I think she starts talking to all of them. And sometimes that's what you need to do when there's a major change. You just need to go back to the fundamentals, and it can be really hard because it makes you feel like you're making even less progress, but it can also be very reassuring to do that. And you'll realize afterwards, no, I needed that, you know? So then we go to the scene with Paula and her son. I love how this is set up because we also have just started to realize that he's not a shitty person. And they're sharing pie and dishing with each other. And she's talking about everything that's going on with Rebecca, and she's having a conversation with her kid that's very similar to how we've seen her talk to her husband. She's being very open. She's sharing things about her life, and it's really sweet. And then he drops a bomb on her that he basically got accepted to the equivalent of the Peace Corps. And he's probably going to be stationed on the other side of the world somewhere. And it's going to be for like a decade. It's not just like a year or two. 8 years, something like that, I think he says. And this is really, first of all, her acting is so good. She's trying so hard to be happy for him. She understands the fact that this is a good thing. But it's just impossible at first for her to separate the grief she's feeling and the loss from what's best for him, you know? And as somebody who did this sort of thing pretty early in life, and by did this sort of thing, I mean applied for something without telling my parents that would lead to me leaving home for, the other side of the country in my case the first time. I have seen this sort of reaction firsthand where a parent genuinely is impressed and proud of you, but also kind of freaking out. I applied to Idlewild, which is where I spent my senior year of high school, without telling my parents. I had applied to a couple of other private schools because I was not feeling satisfied with the education I was getting at my school due to their art program getting cut. And I applied to the first couple with their knowledge, and I didn't get accepted to those schools. They were regular, like, very sports-oriented private schools that are basically the first step to getting into, like, an Ivy League college. They weren't the right fit for me, but it was all I knew of at the time, and I didn't get in. And so I think my parents just sort of dropped the idea and didn't think it was happening. And then I found Idlewild during a massive internet search that took like an entire night where I was just so fed up. I was like, I'm finding something. I applied wholly without telling them because it was a free application. And I wound up getting a call that they would pay for like basically 95% of my tuition. And I remember my mom getting the call and not knowing that I had even applied. And then hanging up and being like, oh my God, what is going on? And the first two schools I'd applied to one was out of state, but only a couple states away. And the other was still in Connecticut. This was California. It was a totally different beast. And she had a bit of a meltdown. And it's a similar, like, my time of life is similar to Paula's son's in that, you are getting out of high school and you're just beginning to develop a personality that isn't just teenage ennui. And so you're actually someone they can talk to for the first time in years and feel like it's more of a give and take. And then all of a sudden they're just about to leave. And I just thought that this is played so well that we understand why this is like so difficult. I love that it's like, Paula being put in a really similar position to Rebecca. And she had told Rebecca in the scene where she finds out about Heather and Valencia and is like, well, I've moved a lot. I've seen people come and go. You do get used to it. And she sort of acts like it's not a big deal. But then when it's somebody that she has grown like to feel like she's gotten closer to and who is her child, she has a very similar reaction. And so it sort of gives her more empathy for what Rebecca's going through. And Paula does this whole thing. I loved this so much. What she attempts to do is set up her son with this girl that he used to like when he was in high school. And she does this like very sort of transparent sort of, oh my God, I just ran into you and I just happened to recognize you. I really enjoyed this moment. Vanessa Rodriguez, that's the girl. And it turns out later that Vanessa immediately texted her son after Paula came in and was like dropping hints and trying shit. And I love that because when she brings Vanessa in and Vanessa's going along with this whole scheme, I was surprised. I was like, Vanessa's into this. And it's sort of weird for her to be like, I feel like she's displaying a bit of Rebecca-ish behavior where she's like colluding with mom sort of against the guy that she seems to be into. What's going on? And it turns out it's all a bit of a joke because they pretend that there's something going on and that there's like still chemistry between the two of them, and then turn it around. And Paula's husband the whole time is like, I am not on board with this at all. What are you doing? Our son is like moving forward with his life and done something really impressive. And why are you trying to stop that? I loved her plea to him as well when she's trying to get him to understand where she's coming from on this. He grew in my stomach. His first sentence was, "Love you, mama." It's for the first 4 years of his life, we were stapled together unless I was at work. And then from the ages of 4 to 18, I lost him. And he's finally back. And now he's leaving. Like, I just loved this. This was so impassioned, and she's just such a great actress, and I fucking love her so much. But then, when her son comes in with Vanessa and is spinning this yarn about how she got pregnant, and he's apparently going to have to give up the Peace Corps, what was it? Peeps for Peace, something like that. And probably start selling drugs again. I mean, God, that was so good. That as soon as he was like, well, I guess Peeps for Peace is out. And I was like, did her husband set this up? And I really liked that her husband was in on it, but he didn't set it up. That her son isn't a grown enough man to be able to see what's happening here. He's not an idiot. And that he is enough of an adult, and so is this girl, who I'm saying is an adult but still calling girl, that they have their communication with each other that is very open and honest about what's actually happening. That, for me, gave another nice layer to emphasizing that he is matured and can handle his life, you know? And I think that worked for Paula as well. So as soon as she hears all of this, like, I guess I'm just going to cancel my plans and give it all up and stay here and, like, raise this kid, her life flashes before her eyes a little bit. She's just like, oh my God, no, what? And she begins to realize that when it comes down to it, she genuinely does want what's best for her son. She really does want him to experience life and do things and not be like, it's not just stay there, stuck in place for the next however long until she determines that she's ready to give him up. And I really enjoyed that. I loved that he is in charge of that sort of deceit, that the whole family is aware and that they are all sort of have this revelation together in the kitchen, because it makes it feel like everybody's involved in each other's lives in a way that we haven't really seen with her family much. And so it really underscores again what she's going to be losing. He's not going to be there, and things are better between her and her youngest, but she's just, we're seeing this for the very first time ourselves, and it's not going to happen again. And it's just really nice to put us in a sort of similar position as her and give us the same feeling. So let's talk about the way that, first of all, Rebecca is deciding that she is going to try and court some new friends. We have AJ and Maya, and they're having like a picnic sort of hangout thing with Rebecca at the park. And she's trying to act like she's super young, like they are. And eventually, things turn a corner when Daryl and White Josh show up with the baby, whose name I just really hope he has changed. But he has not, I don't think. And what we get here is this amazing number of, like, forcing them all together, basically, where these people who are watching the relationship from the outside are convinced that Daryl and White Josh belong together, and they cannot understand why the two of them are continually, like, pretending that they aren't when they spend all of their time together and are clearly still in love. I absolutely love this because I am certain that this was part of the fandom's deal while this show was actually airing. I personally was a massive fan of the two of them as a couple, but also really impressed with how they had come full circle into a friendship and seemed okay with that. There was part of me that wondered if they would eventually decide to be together, but I didn't have strong feelings either way. I wasn't in this sort of shipping camp where I was desperate for them to just be a couple again. I was sort of just interested in seeing what the show decided to do, because either way, I was good, and I wasn't sure what they were going to choose. And it's very interesting, always. This is one of the more fascinating things to me with doing Unspoiled, to cover something after the fact and find out what the fan reaction was to a plot point or relationship years after it's actually happened. Because sometimes I completely am on the same page, and sometimes I can't understand at all why people are reacting the way they are, or why they reacted the way they did. This is one where I'm like, I guess I understand people feeling this way to a degree, but it absolutely wasn't really on my mind at all. Megan says, the fandom shipped Daryl and White Josh so hard, everyone was hoping they'd be back together. I think they were consistently rated everyone's favorite couple in the show. I would love to know what they're using to rate favorite couples. Like, what metric are they employing to determine that? Is it just like polls that were posted places? Like, how do we even know that? I believe you. I'm not trying to indicate, but I just don't, like, it's just so funny to think that there's like a census going out where we're going to take everybody's opinions on couples every season, maybe every half season, and figure out where we are. So she says, like, Reddit polls. I forget about Reddit and TV stuff. Like, I always think of TV stuff as being more the sphere of Tumblr, but that's not really true. Tumblr's more for like the memes that result from shows, but not really like the sharing of ideas of that nature as much. And also, of course, Tumblr's for fan fiction. I don't know if any official ranking existed. I bet there did. I bet somewhere. So there is a part of me too that, and I say this with the full understanding of how this might be kind of gross as a straight woman, but I have started to like realize that I don't get invested as much in shipping straight characters anymore as I do shipping gay characters or bi characters. Basically queer characters in general. Queer relationships hold much more interest for me lately, because it's a combination of, oh my God, are they going to end up together? And also, is this show or is this book going to let them be happy? What kind of author am I dealing with? Like, what kind of world is it that they're trying to set up? Will they be allowed to just be happy? Can they exist in this universe and like be left alone? And just enjoying when it happens and it's not a fucking deal, And I think that, I think that might explain some of the preoccupation with the two of them as a couple. Is like, they're both just very likable people. They're a gay couple that isn't being presented with a ton of like obstacles. So there's not a feeling of like, oh, this relationship stands for something in this greater sense of like a metaphor, or not even a metaphor, but just like, you know, they're not the only gay couple on the show either, because we have Valencia and her girlfriend. Well, she's not gay, she's bi. I don't know about the girlfriend, but they're not the only queer character. And so it feels like there's less pressure on the relationship because of the fact that it's not like a very special episode, but there's also more pressure because they haven't been paired off effectively yet. And whenever there's a show that has so much going on with relationships, people feel the need to tie up loose ends and get that done. So I think that even more than wanting the two of them together specifically, it's like just the fact that the both of them aren't actually declared in a relationship at all makes people uncomfortable. They don't like having those loose ends around at all. And I feel like if both Daryl and Josh got in separate relationships and they were each clearly happy being just friends, but they were with different people, folks would be cooler with that than by the end of this episode, White Josh has sort of entered into a relationship and Daryl hasn't. And Daryl is clearly still having a good time. He's still happy being single. He's enjoying himself at the end of the episode, watching whatever he's watching. It's not being portrayed like he has lost anything, because he doesn't feel that way. But I could see people being outraged at the fact that White Josh is with somebody else and having a good time and has left Daryl alone, because there's just an inherent interpretation to that of negativity, of just one of the party has been abandoned and the other one is just off gallivanting like they don't have a care in the world kind of thing, you know? And it's interesting to me to watch like the audience display some of the same problems that Rebecca has with putting so much weight on relationships and so much meaning on them. And I mean, and I'm saying relationships as if that's like inherently romantic, but White Josh and Daryl have a relationship still, you know, it's just not romantic anymore, but it's still incredibly worthwhile and important. And it's just so frustrating when we betray how much less we respect that than we do a romantic relationship. You know, it just doesn't mean the same thing to us. The fact that these two can put aside their romantic feelings for one another and realize that they still respect and love each other so much that they want to continue being around each other all the time, even if that didn't work out, that's beautiful. Like, that's huge for them as characters and for television, honestly, because television just doesn't like to do that. And I wish that people would just sort of like grow up, honestly. That's what it comes down to for me. And I'm really pleased that, like, I mean, first of all, the number. What is the name of this song? I'm trying to find it here. I'm trying. But basically, it turns into a hoedown. And everybody just basically telling the two of them that we know that you're saying you're broken up and that you're being stubborn about it, but it's obvious that you guys are in love with each other. And both of them being like, what in the hell is going on? Neither of us agreed to this. We don't feel this way. And obviously, what's going on here isn't even really about us, because you could give a shit what we're saying to you about how we feel about it. And I really enjoy when, is it Jim or Tim that says he, like, you're the only two LGBTQ people that I know, and so to me this just seems meant to be. Yo, if that isn't the fucking truth. Anybody who is queer has experienced this. Even people who are like from the same country in a different place have experienced this. When you have something like that is in common with a person that seems like the only thing people know about you, they will try and set you up with whomever they come across that has anything to do with that thing. I had my friend Emily that I worked with for a while at the resort when I was younger. She was from Wales, and she worked at the resort for like 10 months probably. And then this other guy began to work there who was from London. They're both from the same continent. They're not even from like the same like country within whatever. And everybody kept pushing for the two of them to date. He already had a girlfriend. She was not interested in him and he was not interested in her. But because they were from the same place and were both like attractive, you know, everybody was just like, well, obviously you two were meant to find each other. And it was like, how though? They don't even have anything in common, but that was all anybody saw. Granted, White Josh and Daryl do have lots in common and they really like each other. Like it's more understandable in this case, but there is a sense of just like, well, they're each single and they're the only two men who date men on the show. So clearly they have to wind up together because that's just how this goes. Tegan says the name of the song is The Group Mind Has Decided You're in Love. What a great name for a song. That's really good. So eventually we have Josh and he's seeing somebody. And I loved because I thought what was going to happen was he was going to go try and like date and begin to realize, oh, I am still actually in love with Daryl. And instead, it becomes clear that he's using his relationship, his friendship with Daryl as a comfortable, they keep using the word cocoon, to keep himself from going out and experiencing new things and taking risks. And I love Daryl just throwing the water in his face. And at first Josh argues with him and then very quickly begins to realize Daryl has a point. And it's so great that like they genuinely can talk with one another about seeing other people. They can want to hang out and still be like, you shouldn't be here, you know? And at the end of the episode, Daryl meets his new interest. I can't remember what his name is, but he meets this guy and the dude thanks Daryl for throwing water in Josh's face. And the two of them sort of like hit it off right away talking about this show that they're both watching right now. And so not only can the two of them be friends, they can be friends with one another's partners. And that's just like, that's what friendship should be. You know, that's what we're looking for here, everybody. So I just really, really liked this, that it's a very non-traditional direction for all of this to go. And it was surprising and it was just heartwarming. And also, I love the fact that Nate shows up in the midst of this number and tries to act like you can be platonic friends with somebody you just broke up with. And everybody's like, you don't believe that. And he's like, oh, I just want to be part of this number. Like I like that the show is pointing out that this doesn't always work. You know, you don't always get this. And a lot of people don't feel like it's even possible, which is understandable. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work for other people. Tegan says, I appreciate that this show let White Josh and Daryl's differing opinions on children stand, but they still care about each other. I hate when one person relents on the kid issue and the couple never regrets it. Very good point, Tegan. I didn't really take into account the whole kid aspect being specifically what broke them up, but a child is just such a major thing. And having somebody just be like, all right, I guess we'll have a kid since you want one so bad. It's not like you're buying a car, you know, you're changing your entire life. And then really people aren't allowed in media to regret that. There's never a moment where you can say on camera, I wish I never had a kid, and people don't freak the fuck out. But you can't tell me there aren't people out there who feel that, who relented because their partner wanted a thing, and now they're just like, oh my God, why did I let this happen? And vice versa. Somebody who agreed to not have kids even though they wanted them, and now they look back and wish to God that they hadn't let that go. So yeah, that's a good point. So what winds up because there's this whole goodbye party that Valencia and Heather have set up at the house, and Rebecca invites her two friends, Maya and AJ, and all of their friends from these things that they each do. I think AJ goes on some mindfulness hike, and Maya has an ironic scrapbooking group. Honestly, this is so funny. There's so many jokes about millennials and like the meta-ness of things that I can't get into because I don't have time, but I really enjoy. And eventually, all these people are at this party. Rebecca is trying to like do young speak, and it's incredibly painful. She's dressed in this outfit that's like what an old person thinks dressing young looks like. It's a mess. And she's acting like everybody around her are the ones that are old, man, and she's not like that. Until she sees that somebody has put a massive dent in her brand new refrigerator. I love whenever something that's like kind of an offhand thing gets brought back up again in the show. Her buying that refrigerator a couple of episodes ago, that Halloween episode, just didn't think that that was going to matter. And here we are talking about it again, you know? And that is the moment where she snaps and turns the music off and is like, everybody get the fuck out. And I fucking related to that shit so hard. There is nothing like hanging out with younger people to realize how old you've gotten and how much your priorities have changed. And it's not even like you regret it. It's like just, well, that's happened. And here's where I am. And this is not going to be a thing I do anymore. So yeah, the girls are all sitting together and they basically like agree that despite the fact that they're moving away, it's not like they're not going to be friends with one another. They're still going to like be in contact on the phone. They're going to be able to Skype with one another. They're going to text all the time. They are also like, I think Valencia says she's already booked her plane tickets back for Christmas. So like it's a guarantee that they'll be seeing each other. And I really like that as well. And it gives Rebecca a sort of sense of, what's the word? Grounding, I guess. And then Paula has to go home and say goodbye to her son. And it's just a whole different thing. I really liked that they are feeling good about how they've left things. But when it comes to her and her son, she is still getting teary-eyed talking about it. I'm over time here, but I have to talk about Paula's song, which is basically, I never believed in you, but now I do. This is a pretty good bit, although I confess, I always have a weird reaction to songs where only one party in the shot is actually singing and the other person just has to stand there and look at them. I find these kinds of songs incredibly awkward, and I understand that it's necessary sometimes, but watching this kid trying to just be while Paula's singing at him is just distracting and weird. And I wish that there was another way to do this, you know? I wish that maybe she wasn't talking directly to him or singing directly to him, that it was sort of like her watching him from afar and singing to herself. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed this. Like, I, as a mom, definitely thought the worst. And now I believe in you and I can't believe like how far you've come. That feels like that's a reality in a way that you don't really hear verbalized much, you know? And I'm certain that there are just so many parents who have these sorts of moments where they're just like, oh my God, I'm a bad parent and I've ruined my kid. And then, you know, you talk to them years later and their kid's doing amazing and has come so far. And all of these concerns that they had just wind up being like baseless. So yeah, this was a good moment. And I just really liked her being vulnerable with her son and talking to him in a real way about how much she means to him and how far he's come, and that she just, you know, she hadn't taken the time to get to know him is also part of the problem. You know, she sort of had gone years with him being insufferable and felt like that was never going to change. And I can understand that. You get frozen in time a little bit by your parents. And then we get our final montage with everybody and, like, you know, Heather and Valencia talking about their plans, Daryl watching TV, White Josh and his date laughing. And then we go to Rebecca and she's just very sad looking at Estrella, the starfish in the tank. And she's obviously like coping the worst out of everybody with all of these major changes. And that is the end of the episode. It was kind of an odd ending. I liked a lot of like what comprised this episode, but overall the arc of the episode felt a little bit weird where it ended. But Owen, we were watching this together. He didn't like it that much. I liked it a lot more than he did, I think. So I'm going to wrap up because I'm over time. But thank you again so much to Collette for commissioning this. And thank you to Tegan and Megan for hanging out in the chat. I appreciate you guys so much. And I will be seeing y'all again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.